Mr. Chairman.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the board meeting. As you all know, this is a sort of a special interim board meeting because we're not sure we're going to be able to get everything on the agenda when we meet in December, which is just around the corner, of course. But it's great to see all of you. I hope you're all faring well in this continuing challenging time in the age of COVID. When I read in the paper from prominent people that we may be in the same condition a year from now, it's a little terrifying. I'm anxious for the local bar to open, and of course, no one's hanging out there, only the dog and I now. So we have three topics for this meeting, and all of you the meeting, Angela arranged for public comment, and all of you, I think, have received the information that came in on public comment, and there was actually quite a lot, and I did read every piece of it thoroughly, and I thought there were some interesting questions, and there was a bit of repetition. I mean, I think some of the public comment came off of a reproduction machine someplace, but that's okay. So the three subjects we're going to deal with here are the COVID update, and President Schill, I think, is going to lead that discussion, though Patrick and Andre are going to participate as well. And then we're going to have a report by the University of Oregon Foundation that Paul Weinhold is going to do. And we have had the foundation come in and really report to us about once a year for the last several years. And this year, I think Paul is going to discuss in a little more detail some of what's going on at the foundation. I think that'll be terrific. And then we're going to have an update on the information services of the university. Jesse Minton runs those. And for those of you that are not old timers on the board like some of us, one of the things that Mike got started early in his career was getting a new person in to run the IT shop in the university. We were badly behind other comparable universities, particularly in preparation for very sort of what is popularly called big data work. And Jessie was hired from OHSU, and she has been involved in a multi-year project to really modernize and update our IT infrastructure and services. And all reports has done a terrific job. And so Jesse will talk about the status of the information services activities on the campus. So I think we're ready to go, Mike, if you are ready and your team on COVID.
And I'm only going to speak briefly, but let me start by thanking the thousands of faculty members, our staff, administrators who've been working tirelessly this term to support our students and advance our mission of teaching, service, and scholarship. Not only have they continued to work under really a constantly changing landscape, but many of them, as all of you know, are caring for children, loved ones, and some, just have illness in their households in addition. And none of what we've been able to achieve this quarter so far would have been possible without them. So just a heartfelt thank you to them. Now, Patrick's going to provide some brief updates about our academics for the fall term and then our preparations for the winter term. But I want to comment on just a couple other additional aspects of the fall term. First, I'm really proud of the way the vast majority of our students have responded to the pandemic. They have seen the need to protect themselves and to protect others. They're wearing masks. And they are, I walk through campus. I sometimes come down over the weekend with Max, and everybody's wearing a mask on campus. And our percentage numbers are in the mid 90s, and that's 90%, 95% mask utilization, and it is terrific. We're working hard with our city and county partners to educate the remaining students who continue to gather without masks from time to time, both on campus and off campus. Yesterday, I mean, there's a lot of press about groups of students and parties and that sort of thing. Yesterday, I was part of a meeting with public health officials, the presidents of our fraternity and social life, and student affairs, and just the presidents were tremendous, and they are really committed to working with us and working with the county to help ensure the safety of our community and to get the message out to their members to be safe, to wear masks, and to really be careful. Secondly, but we do have work to do there. Secondly, we have really ramped up our COVID testing project, which many of you know we call it the MAP project. It's led by Bill Cresco, Leslie Lev, Greg Shabram, and they've done a terrific job. We're ramping up to be able to do in the not too distant future 4,000 tests per week. And then we're going to expand into the winter term. We are periodically testing students in the residence halls. Andre can tell you more about that. The numbers have, knock wood, been very modest in terms of the numbers of positive cases in the residence halls. We're hoping that that continues with our testing protocol. We're also doing testing importantly outside the residence halls. We've recently been able to expand it to students who are living off campus on a voluntary basis, our staff, our faculty, and then we've done some community testing, particularly for underrepresented populations. And indeed, Leslie and Bill and the group have gotten, I believe, a $4 million grant from NIH to do Latinx testing around the state. We've also gotten resources from the state government. So it's really exciting because, as Patrick would say, this is why you have a great research university for moments like this. When we have the facilities, we can use our research expertise and serve the broader community, both of Eugene, Lane County, Oregon, and the nation. And that makes us all feel good, and it makes us feel we're fulfilling our mission. Now, as we move into the fall term and the winter term, we're going to continue taking precautions. We're going to evaluate the situation. We'll adapt as necessary in coordination with the Oregon Health Authority and local government officials. And we have a terrific relationship with them, very, very cooperative. And I think that is terrific. It doesn't exist that way in every location around the United States. And as I've said over and over again, health and safety of our students and our faculty and staff are our most important priority. And while this is mostly a discussion about COVID-19 and campus operations today, I'd be remiss if I didn't take a moment to acknowledge that we actually have an election coming up next week. And this has been obviously a difficult time for people of all political beliefs. And it is important that we remember our role as an academic institution, a place where we engage in critical thinking with respect to the freedom of individuals to have different viewpoints. And really, it's a celebration of our democracy that we have that, and that the university is the place where people of all viewpoints, left, right, middle, can come together and can talk without fear, without any compunctions, but to be able to sharpen their minds and potentially persuade others. And I have every confidence that our community will act with grace, civility, and focus on a path forward, regardless of the outcome on Tuesday. I also recognize that our university has a really strong tradition of protest, peaceful protest, and I understand that is could very well happen in the next week, couple weeks, and we will adapt to that as it happens. Now, I recently sent out a message to the campus community that includes several resources for students, faculty, and staff during the election season. And I encourage us all to stay engaged in conversation and respectful debate now, and especially after the election, when we'll be trying to make sense of what has happened in the country and where our future lies. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Patrick, who is going to give us a quick update about academic matters on campus. Patrick?
Thank you, and thanks for everyone for even more time at board activities, and we definitely appreciate that extra time. And I was talking to someone, sent an email recently that I really missed the opportunity to have lunch with you, for instance, and talk about other things kind of going on campus. I will be extremely brief because I think just to let you know that the term is underway. You may be aware. Things are going well. We will be discussing enrollment and other issues. We don't actually have all of our numbers locked down for a few more days yet, so it's a little premature to go through that. We are delivering our mode of education similar to the spring, but we've actually expanded our our in-person offerings tremendously. About 20% of our courses are actually on campus in person right now. Those are focused on lab courses, creative activities. The School of Music and Dance has stepped forward just amazingly with a facilities plan and lessons and other group music activities in a safe way in person. So that's the way we're operating. It seems to be going well. I think we've reported before that we greatly expanded our what are called online official courses. That is, these are designed to be asynchronous and have course designers that help do that. And that allows flexibility for students. We've also increased for remote courses, which are essentially kind of what we would normally think of a course, but just taught in a remote setting. We have continued to focus on engagement and accountability from the faculty side to make sure that students feel like they are interacting with faculty directly and have engagement opportunities. Just like the board, we get trickle-in concerns, and sometimes it's confusion about what to expect when you take a course. And so we're pushing out, and we actually just sent an email to all students. Again, going through, as you look towards the winter, these are the ways that courses are delivered. This is what it means when you see web versus remote versus in person, and so on and so forth. So I think everybody in the community is still learning what's going on. But everybody's working very hard. The president already referred to faculty and staff with caregiving needs, and allowing, it's not a solution, but at least allowing the remote offering of courses does provide extra flexibility, especially for faculty in those environments. Moving on in the winter, my whole attitude through the entire COVID crisis is slow and steady wins the race. I don't know what race we're winning, but we're just going to survive. It's a race for survival and maintenance. So moving into the winter, where it's more of the same, I would anticipate that we will continue to offer more in-person courses, but we're not requiring faculty to teach in person. So we are surveying faculty. We have had a small experimental, what's called high flex group of faculty that are teaching kind of simultaneously in person and remote. And we just, Janet Woodruff-Borden, the Executive Vice Provost, has been shepherding that program. We just put out a web page on that. We could actually send that information around if you're interested, for faculty who have been doing that and investing a lot of energy. So we are making that modality available more broadly to faculty if they choose to want to do that. A lot of faculty are very hungry to interact with students, just as students are, interested in being around their peers and with their faculty. So what I anticipate we've already announced for the winter, that's what we're doing. I kind of imagine this for the whole year. If we can keep the country together and the public health status good, we'll just keep slowly ramping up and expanding in a way that's comfortable, both for our public health status, our safety. I'm very confident in that. There's just no evidence on a national scale that there's any transmission in the classroom environment or in academic settings. There's just no reported incidents of that. But we'll continue to expand and do so in a way that works well as possible for students and faculty. And so far, we're all holding together and people are really leaning in to do the work.
Patrick, can we see if anyone has a question for you? Just Mary Wilcox, go ahead, Mary.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Mike and Patrick, so much for this. Is such a heavy load during this time, and we really appreciate what's being done. My question goes back to a lot of the public comment, and it sounds as if there is a concern about the lack of either communication or testing of employees and student health service people. So I was hoping maybe you could address that.
So, President Chill, would you like me to talk about it, or would you like to? We also have Leslie Lev on the line. I saw who's the director of our testing program. So, as the president intimated, I haven't been more proud of anything in my 20 years at the University of Oregon than the last 6 months of standing up independently through necessity our own clinical testing lab on campus. It's just been a huge amount of effort and really just a lot of independent kind of work by faculty and staff to get this driving because of the perceived need, which is real. So we've used almost all of that testing capacity. It came together just as we were moving everybody into the dorms. We tested everybody in the dorms twice on move-in. Our positive rates were minuscule, quite frankly, and our quarantine rates of students are very low and continue to be low. So we're doing a great job there. We have continued testing of every room. That means if a roommate is there, we only test a roommate every other weekly. So we're doing that. Now we are just this week expanded testing, and we were also doing some fraternity and sorority testing on a volunteer basis. Just this week, we're expanding it to faculty and staff with a particular concentration on frontline staff who we have been hearing this from the safety committee that people would like to be tested. I appreciate the concerns, especially of our staff members. I regularly go to the safety committee and meet with them and talk to them. I do have to say that the best way to keep our faculty and staff safe is to test students. Testing does not protect you from anything. It just tells you if you're positive. And so what we really need to do is just keep the rate of transmission low. And the best way to do that is to make sure that we're obviously using our normal practices of masks, but also finding ways, and we've actually done very well, I think, in addressing these social gatherings and the off-campus behavior. That's where almost all the positives are. And we have very low rate of positives, only a few cases of faculty and staff. Again, none of them that I know of that have occurred on campus. So we are expanding that capacity, and I know people are frustrated that we have to say we're doing the best we can, but we are doing very well, actually, and we are expanding rapidly into that space. So it's now available to people as they want to use it. We can't test every single person, and there are also legal requirements of that, then mandating testing of employees, but that's kind of where we sit right now.
Also, let me, Mary, just mention with regard to communications. This is, it's very much in the eye of the beholder. We are communicating, Kyle and his group are pushing out a tremendous amount of communications across lots of different media. Everyone has a different view as to, everybody wants more communication. And then when you say, have you seen the communication? No, I haven't seen it. because quite honestly, there's so much coming out that we're actually a little concerned we're bombarding people with too much information. And so we may need to scale back on some of that so people don't ignore the important information. You know, we're always open, and we've been meeting with students. And indeed, at yesterday's meeting, part of the question was, you know, is it getting through? Or you know, is it better to have the students communicating rather than the administration, or is it the administration rather than the students? And you know, everybody has a different viewpoint on that, but you know, we want to get better because and we want to really have salient communications.
Great.
Laura Lee, yeah, go ahead, Laura Lee.
Thank you, Chuck. I'm delighted that the testing has expanded as rapidly as it has. As a member of the faculty, I am taking advantage of the opportunities to get tested, and my observation is it's going very well. I'm curious, and that part of this was a response to some public comments that we got about having vendors on campus, for example, in the EMU, and other folks from off campus who are spending quite a bit of time on our campus providing services. And I'm wondering if there are opportunities for expanding our reach to include those members of our UO community that are working on campus on behalf of faculty, staff, students primarily. And you know, it may not be part of the plan, but I was just curious about if there is a plan to continue to expand and include some of those vendors.
That has not been part of our current plan. I think our hope is I hope everybody saw, and the president made a reference to the NIH grant. I can't remember, President Chill, if you mentioned the $4.3 million investment by the state. So we're just setting up a really comprehensive testing lab in the Knight campus. Again, continuing the theme, the state invested, as you know, a lot of money in bond funds to help set up the Knight campus, a nice fraction. And because of that, we can now set up a testing lab in a high quality space. So I think we're about to experience a quantum leap in our capacity that will come online hopefully right after the new year. Then I think quite frankly, what you're talking about, Laura Lee, is actually the county's public health response, not just the universities. And once we have that capacity, I think it will actually depend on what the state wants to do in terms of funding and the county capacity to implement that. Because I think then our role is not just what is it to get a burrito in the EMU, but what is it for the entire county to be able to be tested in a wide variety of businesses and all of these health circumstances. And I think that's where the conversation will go rather than being so self-focused at that moment.
Any other questions before we turn to Andre? Or okay, Andre, I think you're there. You are. Nice to see you.
You too. So yeah, thanks for letting me come and give a quick update and kind of building off what Patrick and Mike were saying. I'm going to kind of hit some of the high points, but I think what Patrick just mentioned about testing, again, I'd be remiss, I've been saying this as the county, we are very laser focused on testing, but there are so many other things that we have to be doing in concert, again, with the mask utilization and watching our space and things like that. And I'm happy to report that I really think the U of O, again, we have issues, but we're focusing when those issues come up, using kind of the talent of the campus to address that. But also we have to look at, when we set the health and safety operations plan back in fall, we had expectations that resident population, that we would see higher numbers than we're seeing now. And again, we all kind of cross our fingers when we say things like that. Because the reality is that part of that is that students are following some of those directives. So I'm going to kind of hit some of the high points and then really just open it up if there are questions, but the testing part, what Patrick said, I think is key there, that our partnership with Lane County Public Health and OHA is critical. That, part of the reason I feel like we get a lot of these questions is because we invested in this testing capacity. So that is a good thing. We have that capability, and we have that capability for our campus and our community. But we have to, realize that that still is not a statewide thing. So we're not there yet. But I do feel like the work that we're doing, what we're doing with other institutions in the state, is going to benefit the communities in the state. So a couple things on kind of those high level. I think you're also aware that we worked with the county, and it's part of our safety and operation plan, on developing a COVID alert dashboard. The neat thing about that dashboard is that it's not just looking at disease prevalence, which I think all of us, see in the news, but it's also about the partnerships that we have built and kind of maintaining a set of indices, both from the university stance. So I'll run through kind of where we're at with those indices. But what I think is really critical is the partnership and the common space that we have made with the university and Lane County Public Health coming together, that every Tuesday, the incident commanders for the cities of Eugene, Springfield, Lane County, LCC, Florence, McKinsey-Willamette Medical, and Peace Health, we have a call and we talk about where are we at and how do we have to adjust. This is unique in the state right now that we have this approach. And again, that's one of those things that it takes all of us working together. And I think people are probably, all of this is public. You can see it online. So for the county, for our alert level, we are still in a high. So again, and we started the term, we're in a moderate stance. A couple of weeks ago, or about a month ago, we moved up into a high stance, but it's really important to understand what triggers that. And so, what we have seen over the last month or so is an increase in cases, an increase in spread within the community, a stress on our hospital capacity, but they still have capacity, meaning there's a lot of questions about, well, where do we go next? That really what we're looking at here is, as Patrick and others have said, how do we reduce the spread? How do we make sure that we flatten the curve? That unfortunately, this is kind of, we're facing kind of that new norm. But the key that we're all working towards, at least, in Lane County and all the counties throughout the state, is really monitoring that hospital capacity. The other part that we're seeing is, again, we have some challenges with off-campus housing activities and outbreaks there. But across the community, what we are seeing is, again, these are smaller. I like to say that some of the outbreaks that we're experiencing now are when we're doing the interpersonal, where we are with small groups and we let our guard down. That, again, this is a virus. It does not care if you know each other and you think, well, I'm hanging out with Patrick. It's okay. That's where we're seeing the uptick, is when people are letting their guard down. So the reason I say there's a bright light, that right now things are looking really good on the campus, but we are doubling down on our messaging and communication, because we know things like Halloween, Thanksgiving, that's where we've seen the upticks, that, again, in those social behaviors. But I think it's so critical that, some people focus on groups of 10 or groups of 50. It's really about when we let our guard down and don't follow those protective measures, that's where we're giving the virus an opportunity. So again, from our community, kind of indicator levels and the things that we're tracking, the ones that I want to put emphasis on, and again, also highlight where we're tapping into researchers and the academic powerhouse of the U of O. So this mask utilization. So again, we had this idea way back in, I think it was late July, where it was this idea of, could we utilize a survey methodology that would allow us to see how mask utilization is happening in our campus spaces. We've been doing that, as Mike had mentioned. I'm happy to report that since we started observing, so this is the week before classes started, we have hovered at about 93%. This is not a stick approach that we're taking here. It's a challenge that we're basically asking the community, to keep us above the 90%. What is exciting is we've been able to then bring in our community partners. So just this week, if you go to the indice board that is shared with the county and the partners I talked about, we have the first posting of, we now know what's happening in the community. So the same students that are working underneath IPRE and doing the survey have now expanded to look at spaces out in the broader community, and that's Eugene, Springfield, and we're working on actually also making ties to Florence. Now, their numbers are not where they want to be, and they're working on the messaging. They're hovering right at about 70%. So again, that's that part of we're leading in the sense of we're taking this serious. We are doing everything we can in our power on campus to model good behavior and show good behavior, but we're also sharing. So the tools and anything that we develop, if it is of use for the county, we are exporting that and working with our government affairs folks to get that message out. And again, the reason I like to emphasize the masks, I think it is equally important to talk about mask utilization as it is about testing, because the mask utilization is what really cuts the spread until we can figure out treatments and vaccines and things like that. As you also heard from Patrick, we are monitoring through MAP, and if you have questions about testing, Leslie is on the call and can answer some of those. But we did the two rounds at move-in for our residential halls for the students on campus. That yielded a positivity rate that was about 0.16, very low. Part of that, I think, is the quality of testing that we're doing, that it's a much more sensitive test. We also know that students knew that if they wanted to live on campus, they had to pass a test, and they did. We expected to see those rates go up, and based upon what we saw in semester schools, we were bracing for those rates could have gone anywhere from 3 to 9%. The latest data, which again is online underneath our case tracking, testing, and isolation and quarantine data. So this is the data as of the 23rd, so the week of October 17th to October 23rd. So we lag about a week on kind of posting this data. We are at 0.7% positivity within the residential halls. So again, we had expected that to climb. It's holding, and that's a good thing. The other aspect that's important to note here is the same thing with the plans that we put in place for isolation and quarantine. We have set aside, I think, as you all know, Barnhart for isolation and quarantine. And again, publicly, we are projecting and putting out how much we're using per week. So in isolation, we have about 28% occupation of isolation rooms. And for quarantine, which is actually the larger volume. So if we identify one student that's positive, then you have the contact tracing that there might be 5, 6, 7 people that we actually have to put into quarantine. Quarantine's running at 26%. And it's important to note on those data sets that we have set aside 50 rooms for isolation, 194 for quarantine, but we have plans. So the point of monitoring this is if we would see an uptick, we have a secondary and a tertiary plan to increase that quarantining space. Right now, what would trigger that is if we started to see where we're starting to see it consistently above 50%, we would want to make sure that we start bringing on those other things. And this is that combination of testing, where testing helps in the sense of the testing and tracing and treating, we're containing. And so when we identify those cases, how do we pull them out of general circulation? Students aren't super excited about the isolation time and the quarantine time, but we've been working to get them out of isolation, get them quarantined, so that again we are ultimately reducing the spread. The other kind of indicators, again, for us that have been things that we're tracking is the stability of the supply lines and supply chains. So everything on campus that we need as far as, the cleaning supplies, all of the other goodies that we need to combat COVID, we're monitoring that. We are still in a stable environment. We have a group that's looking at the logistics and the supply chains weekly, reporting out. And again, the intent there is if we see a disruption, we can change before the disruption becomes real problematic for us. And then as we move into the winter, we not only have COVID, but you also have other things that could happen, whether that be just regular influenza or sickness. We are also monitoring our critical or essential services that we provide. So think power plant, data systems, things like that, as the availability of the people we need to run those. And so again, this is something in the incident management team we use actually regularly during winter term for ice storms and things like that. So we're actively monitoring. At this point, we're not seeing any disruptions to that. And then the last thing that I'll end with and then open up if there are comments and questions, would be we're really that communication part that Mike was talking about. There is a wealth of information on the website, and it really is this challenge of getting people to the right information for the questions that they have. And we are fighting challenges that are not unique to the U of O, in the sense of if somebody sends a tweet and says something, we have this issue that people are actually more trusting of that tweet to say, surely the institution is saying something wrong or it's not right. Whereas before we post something, we are making sure that it meets all the guidelines that, so we're running through this process. And I think sometimes that's seen as the institution is slow to respond. We're not as much slow to respond as before we respond. We really want to collect the data and make sure it's accurate before we post it and update it. But we are still running the same systems we were back in spring of if people post messages, we look at them, we adjust the FAQs. And then the last part there is that we are also working with faculty. Ellen Peters out of the journalism school has assembled a group that has been kind of advising the comms team on how to do messaging. And next week we will actually, through Ben Clark and the IPRI group, they will be doing some survey work on kind of messaging and asking students what's working, what's not. So again, being as agile and adaptive as we possibly can. So with that, I will pause and open it up if there are questions. And I've got a number of colleagues from the IMT that are joining today that can answer questions that you may have.
Go ahead, Elisa.
Andre, you've done such a great job in the residence halls and now on campus. When students decide to come back after Thanksgiving, is it going to be status quo with how you're testing, or is it going to be ramped up again like the first time they arrived on campus in the fall? And then, how do we keep our good numbers after people go home or go places for the holiday?
Yeah, and I'll let Leslie speak to kind of the testing methodologies that we have. The one thing that we are doing is, if you remember in our plan, that we go fully remote for Thanksgiving. And I know that Roger and his team we're working on messaging now that part of that was to cut down the travel time. So that part of when you go home, consider staying home, but we will be, and Leslie can speak to, we will be running testing throughout the term, but it won't be the same level. And part of that is we're still waiting to see how many students will actually be returning. Leslie, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure, yeah, I think, Elisa, your question about January when students come back, perhaps, or
it's post Thanksgiving?
Or just
kind of both. I'm sure we won't have the same amount coming back after Thanksgiving and as we will in January, but just in general, how do we keep up our good numbers for the safety of the community and Lane County?
Right, so from Thanksgiving through December, we will keep on the same rotation where we have testing every week for the residence hall students so that each room is students in each room are tested each week. And then we're already definitely thinking about January when we have more of a mass influx back of students back to campus. And there are really two options that we're laying out for leadership to make a decision on. One is to do an antigen test, which those are the more rapid tests. It's a different kind of technology, but you do get your result right away. One limitation is that they have a higher false positive rate, but we have a solution for that where immediately after receiving a positive test with an antigen test, we could sample with take a new sample and run that with the qPCR technology, which is the more kind of gold standard test. So that would have a backup plan. So that's scenario one, or scenario two is to just continue with the qPCR protocols and have all of the students tested before they are socializing and physically having contact with others in the residence halls. So we have kind of two pathways forward, and those options are being laid out for leadership to make a decision in the next week or so.
Any other questions, Jennifer?
Yeah, thanks. And again, mega thanks to all of you. Want to piggyback on that last comment, and I have another question too. One is with the antigen testing and the false positives, can you talk about what the reporting procedure requirements are with that? And if we have to report that to the county, can we rescind it? It's one of those things that makes noise, but if they're false positives, how do we get them out of the count? And second, I'd heard that we are considering sewage testing. I thought we were not going to do that. And can you tell me how the thinking on that has changed?
Yeah, the first question, Cassie or Andre, you have more info. This is actually a hot conversation right now among the different medical labs in Lane County. So, and I think there are different protocols if it's a positive with an antigen, if it's a symptomatic individual versus an asymptomatic individual. And the kind of testing we are doing is with asymptomatic individuals, which I think gives us more leeway in terms of doing this confirmatory qPCR and then going with that result. But as of right now, to my knowledge, there's not a definitive conclusion on that. And the medical doctors throughout all of the labs in Lane County are having this conversation right now, probably as we are meeting. Andre, would you like to add to that?
That's right. That again, so the plans that we're laying out, we'll be then working with the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Lucky at Lane County, that actually, some of those tests, there are protocols at the state of what gets counted and what doesn't. And again, generally antigen tests are utilized for diagnostic if you present with symptoms or you are contact, and then that's followed up with a PCR. So basically you're assumed presumptive and you take the steps to kind of isolate until a more detailed test can be done. But the county stance is they basically underneath diagnostic. So those are things that are under discussion and are definitely key to, again, as we expand testing, we need the medical side to kind of determine how they're going to do those counts. To the question on sewage, you're probably referring to, or again, I know that it's out there that we're partnering with the TRACE program at OSU for November 7th and 8th. And, as an old public works person, I'm excited that they're going to be doing that type of work. But so we're not, meaning the University of Oregon is not going to be doing the sewage sampling tests, but we are partnered between the MAP program and TRACE. So OSU will be sampling as part of their program over that weekend for the Eugene area.
Any other questions? Can I just ask Patrick, or this is sort of tangential, but where did we end up on enrollment for the year?
I think, Chuck, if Jamie Moffitt's on the call, she would tell me that I shouldn't answer your question quite yet because we don't know the exact enrollment numbers until the students pay in full. As you probably are aware, we have multiple opportunities for students to withdraw as we move along. So I think that we will be having more definitive enrollment numbers in actually a week or so. But Jamie, you are the keeper of the official way to report out on that.
Yeah, and actually, we'll probably have numbers to report out very, very shortly. Basically, in terms of large trends, what I can report is that our continuing student base stayed fairly steady. Where we did see the very significant drop was in first-year students, particularly in non-resident students. And the numbers that we're looking at are similar to the scenarios that we shared with the board in September, and specifically the scenario that had the first-year class, I think it was somewhere around 3,950. Remember last year, I think we were above 4,500. So that's a very significant drop in that first-year class, but we did stay fairly steady with our continuing students. And so we should have those fourth-week numbers very, very shortly in a form that we can get them out to folks, but nothing unexpected in the last several weeks based on what we were projecting.
Okay, great.
And Chair Lewis,
I withdraw the question then. Thanks, Jamie.
Just a quick reminder, Chair Lewis, that this topic, enrollment for this academic year, is actually will be on the agenda for the November 13th meeting. So Jamie will be there, and then Roger Thompson and Jim Brooks will be there to talk about final enrollment numbers, financial aid, scholarships, et cetera.
Thank you. Okay, no other questions, I guess, for the COVID discussion. Thank you very much. And boy, I'll tell you, I'm really impressed with how well the university has been managing this unbelievably complicated challenge. So everybody, congratulations and thank you very much. I think we're ready to turn to Paul Weinhold and the foundation. Are you there, Paul? You are, okay.
Yes, I'm here.
So I don't think I need to make any other introductory comment. The board is always interested in how things are going at the foundation, and I think all of us understand the relationship between the university and the foundation. So Paul, we appreciate you making time today to give us a briefing on it.
Great, thanks, Chuck, and I'm happy to be here. So I know that that you've all heard from me before, or most of you have heard from me before, and know quite a bit about the foundation. But I'm going to put up some slides and walk through them. And feel free at any time to ask questions. So the share slide screen just went away, Angela. Ah, there it is. Sorry. Let me see. And I'm not a slide person typically, so now I am struggling with getting the right slide. So, but while I'm digging for this, I'll just start with kind of the brief overview of what you've seen in the packet of information I sent. And there's a, I am really sorry about this, but I am not finding my slide.
Angela, can you help us?
Oh, yeah, Paul, I can share my screen and then you can just tell me when to.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you very much. So, I mean, the first slide I just put together is just a summary of what we do. And it really is, you know, I put the mission of the foundation there because it really comes down to the core function of the foundation. And if we could just go to the first page, that'd be great. Is to receive, manage, and distribute gifts, donor gifts. So by receiving gifts, I'd say on average, we probably receive 50,000 gifts a year. Mike Andreasen could give exact numbers on that, but it's a very large number of gifts that come in every year, and those gifts are come with restrictions that what donor where they want that to go, which department, which school or college, athletics, whatever, and then we manage the money. So we have, you know, as we'll talk about a little bit later, you know, $1.3 billion in assets under management, and again, I'll go into a little bit more detail on that, but it is these funds are very restricted. I think within the endowment we have 2,500 separate accounts that when the donor gives, sits in the account, money's distributed, and then we distribute it to campus based on the specific desires of the donor. So, you know, to put it in context, we make about 50,000 gifts come in a year, and we make about 30,000 distributions a year. And those, again, go to various areas of campus. So that's kind of the general overview. You'll have heard about the foundation doing different things on behalf of the university, and I've listed a few of those things here. Probably the major thing that we do outside of receiving, managing, and distributing is managing the donor database, which is primarily used by advancement, but partially used by all areas of campus. And you know, it's an elaborate database that has information on not only on gifts, but activities that people participate in. And, you know, we have probably, I'd say, you know, 8 or 9 technology people, programmers and analysts working on that at all times, working very closely with Mike Andreasen's team on how best to use that data. You know, projects that we're involved with are privately funded, primarily athletic projects on campus, Hayward Field being the most recent example that has been completed. We're currently in the final stages of the Matthew Knight Arena coaches' offices, which if everything holds true, they will be substantially complete tomorrow and will be turned back to the university on Monday. Coaches will move in. I believe that they'll start taking possession on the 13th, which is a Friday, I believe, and then they'll be in there with the student athletes on the 16th of November. So that project has gone very, very well. We have some real estate holdings that we've purchased on behalf of the university. You know, 2 notable ones, White Stag Building and 1600 Mill Race. Those are a bit of a legacy. I mean, we used to buy more property for the university, but, you know, as with the university has become much better able to handle those things. So I don't really see us doing that much anymore. So really it's down to the receive, manage, and distribute. And so Angela, if you could go to the next page, I would appreciate it. Thank you. So this is a general overview of where assets are in the foundation. As it says at the top of the screen, we have, you know, roughly $1.3 billion in assets. Of those, a little over 1.1 million are in long-term assets. And then we have short-term assets, which I'm going to go into more detail about each one of these without making it too mind-numbing. So I can't see a lot of faces on the screen. So if anybody has a question, please chime in at any point. So just to make it brief, the long-term assets, the Willamette pool. That is the Willamette pool, the WIP, which it's commonly called. That's the true endowment. We have $967 million in the endowment. We have another fund, U of O managed assets, which we call T3. Those are the long-term reserves for the university that we've invested for them. I think Jamie could speak to this more clearly, but I think it's probably been about 3 years now, and we've been making distributions out of that and had really good returns. Deferred assets are people who set up a trust in the name of the university. They take the interest on that trust until the time of their passing, and then the university is a beneficiary. So those are less active investments. And then short-term assets, we have the general investment program, which we call the GIP. That's a cash available to spend for the university, not for the university writ large, but for the various departments, schools and colleges, that they have specific funds that they can draw from based on donor intent to spend. There's another fund called the intermediate term pool, which we call the ITP. That's cash held for projects. So I'm going to take just a second to try to put this in a little bit of a context with, let's take the Knight campus pledge of $500 million. So far, we have received $200 million in pledge payments on that particular gift. Those funds come into the ITP, the bottom right of your screen, or I believe it'd be the bottom right of your screen. Funds go into there, they're held, and when the Knight campus needs the funds, they're spent. So far we've had $200 million go into that fund. We have $300 million remaining in pledge payments. We'll get another $50 million this calendar year. Those funds will come in and they'll be split. $20 million of that will go into the Willamette investment pool on the far left of your screen, into the endowment, and $30 million will go into the ITP to be spent on the Knight campus. Now, as time goes on, well, after the first quarter, there will be a distribution of 1%. We distribute 4% a year, 1% per quarter out of the endowment, and that will go into the general investment program, or the GIP. So the money moves out of the endowment. It moves from the Willamette pool to the GIP to campus. So, I mean, that's the quick overview on that. And Angela, if you would be so kind as to go to the next page. Now I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on each one of the various buckets, each one except for the deferred assets, because there's really not much to say about that. The foundation had their board meeting this last week, and the board voted again to release 4% as a distribution out of the endowment. So each of those 2,500 accounts will get a 1% per quarter distribution. I wanted to just show you the mix of investments, and I think it would be way too much for this meeting to go into the details and the specifics of these investments, but I just wanted to have you see just a little bit of the structure. Jamie and Ross and people from the foundation get together on a quarterly basis to look at these investments in more detail. And if anybody would like to join those meetings, feel free at any time. We'd be happy to have you. There has been, and even some of the public comments that I saw, there have been some criticism that the foundation is not transparent about investments. And I just want to put that into context. We can be as transparent as we're essentially legally allowed to be. When we invest with an investment manager, they have their own investment philosophy, their investment strategy, which they consider to be confidential. So we have to sign confidentiality agreements that in some cases, we won't even release the name of the manager. We can release basics, we can share publicly their basic strategy, but we can't legally release the detail. But for all other everything else, we will be as transparent as we possibly can. There's also, I saw in the public comments, there were questions about divesting of fossil fuel. And this is a topic that has been around for quite some time. And again, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago. It was a multi-year process. I think it was in the first couple of years of President Schill's term that we address this with the various constituents. And we made the commitment at that time that we would not make any further investments in the extraction of fossil fuels. At the time, we had a very small amount. I would say it was less than 1% of the endowment. And because of the types of endowments, these things roll off a bit. And so if there is much investment in extraction, it is a very, very small number, and it is going away. Pause for any questions at this point. Okay. You know, I think that the thing that was on the foundation board's mind, and I think it's on the minds of many people, is, you know, how did the endowment do through the first phase of the coronavirus? And I'll just take a moment before we go to the next slide to put that into context. If you look at the bottom of the screen, you know, in June 30th of 2019, the endowment was at $931 million. We've made $58 million of distributions to the university since that time. Incredibly, $45 million of new gifts have come in and $39 million of investment gains. So that's how we got from 931 to 967 over the last 12 months. The last piece, it's not a major one, but I want to point it out that there's sometimes confusion of, you know, how does the foundation finance itself, if you will. And we assess a 1% fee on the endowment on 225 basis points on a quarterly basis to fund the operations of the foundation. Now, we've been fortunate for the last 3 years, and we'll be in the same position this year, that we haven't spent the money that we assessed. So at the end of the last 3 years, we have returned $1 million back into the endowment. It's evenly distributed to the various accounts within the endowment, but that's something we take very seriously, and we're constantly looking at ways to drive down our costs so that we can, you know, basically maintain the purchasing power of the endowment and keep money going, not charge as much, I guess, to save the long-term health of the endowment. So now, Angela, we could slide down a little bit, and to the thing that obviously everybody wants to know, and like, how are we doing compared to our peers? NACUBO is the best peer set, that peer group that we can align with, because it's 800 plus institutions. And unfortunately, we don't have that data this year. It's a long story, but we didn't report the data in 2019. So we did this year, and we'll have it in 2020, but that are end of 2020, first part of 2021. But for comparative purposes, Cambridge is the sort of the gold standard of university endowments, and they not only manage but consult on endowments, and they track, you know, 140 or so of the top endowments in the country. The very, very short answer here is that endowments are managed for the long term, and which we're, you know, very, very proud of. We're in the, you know, almost in the top quartile at a 10-year return. But for the last year, we, you know, with COVID and some other investment decisions we made, we were impacted on a short-term basis. Our 1-year numbers were not good, which put us more toward the median at 3 and 5 years. So we're expecting those returns to recover. They've already recovered in the last 3 months. So, you know, through 9/30, I think we're up 5 or 6%. So there will be a recovery that will affect all the various years going forward. But the most important thing for us is looking at the 10-year returns, and we feel very confident that with this data set, we're near the top quartile. Questions, comments? All right, we can scroll down to the next page. So these are the cash accounts. And again, it looks like, I mean, it is a large number. There's $133 million that are essentially available to spend for campus. And I know that, let's put it in the context of the foundation board, this is always kind of a shocking number to think, wow, there's $133 million there. Can't we aggregate that money? Can't we spend it in some way? The simple answer is no, that these follow very specific donor intent, and the university has to demonstrate the need on campus is in alignment with the donor intent. You can have funds that built up over a few years for faculty who want to buy something, buy an expensive piece of equipment, make a hire, and then for scholarships and things like that, there's a pretty quick turnover. But this is not an unusual number for the size of the endowment that we have, but it is a large number. There's a benefit here in that this is an area that, because of some changes we've made in our budget, and being able to live off the assessment and the endowment, we're able to transfer all of the earnings from the GIP to the President's Fund. And the President has chosen to support development with this, which has been the history of the foundation, to find ways to support development as part of our partnership. So, in terms of this year, there will be, probably $2 million that will be transferred to the President and ultimately to development. So we feel really good about finding a way to be able to support Mike and his team. So if we can slide down one more. Again, the intermediate term pool, we talked about this earlier. This is for cash, people who make, cash gifts that are going to construction projects. So whether it's the Knight campus, whether it's Hayward Field and some others, we put them directly into the intermediate term pool because it has to be 100% liquid, because the money's going to come in and go out. In the case of the GIP, it doesn't need to be as liquid because there's always going to be a certain amount of funds there that we can invest them a little bit more long term. Questions? All right, we'll go to the next. So U of O managed assets. So probably, what was it, 3 or 4 years ago, we, in talking to Jamie, that we decided it was that there was a way that the foundation could help take what we call T3, which is the third tranche of the reserves. So the deepest reserves, if you will, and move them to the foundation and have them invested to get more of a return rather than just, CD rates or something like that. It's been very successful. You can see it's sort of a typical 70-30, stock bond split. That's the or 60-40 stock bond split. That's the benchmark that we're using, which over the period of the last 3 or 4 years has been roughly 6.2%, and we're at 9.5. There are distributions that are made out of this on an annual basis, but I think it's been a very much of a success for the foundation to be able to help. And I know Jamie and Ross and others have been pleased with the performance. So that brings us to the end. Are there any questions, comments?
I'll just, if you don't mind, Paul, just because you mentioned the T3s, I'll just chime in to put this in context. So the T3s, just to remind folks, we get a report on that each quarter that you'll see in our annual meetings that gives more detail on those investments and the returns. And that represents kind of our deepest level of reserve. So we basically consolidate all of the cash for the university, and we have our 3 tiers of how we invest it. And this represents the amount that we don't expect to need to make liquid. And so it's invested to get a higher return, whereas we have other funds that are sitting with, for example, Oregon State Treasury, which need to be more liquid for when we need those resources. So just to remind folks, this kind of represents on the university side that deepest level of reserves that we are trying to get higher returns on because they do not need to be quite as liquid.
Other questions for Paul? That I'm unable to see all of you, so
They're back.
Any questions? Okay,
All right.
Paul.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's turn to to Jesse Minton. Jesse, do I see you?
You sure should. Good afternoon. How is everyone today?
Hi, Jesse.
Hi.
So Jesse, I by way of an introduction, I mentioned that when Jesse came onto the management team at the university, we had a lot of need to update and improve our IT infrastructure and services and really modernize them. And Jesse's been doing this for 4 years, I guess, right, Jesse?
Close. Yep. 3.5.
and has really done a wonderful job. So we really look forward to hearing from you about what's going on and the status of your program. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can you all see my PowerPoint presentation slides?
Yeah.
Wonderful. So today I want to talk about a few things. I actually do want to begin with the introduction of Melody Riley, who's a very important hire for us here at the U of O. We had our Associate CIO for Applications and Middleware retire over the summer, Noreen Hogan, after 25 years of service, beginning as an IT student, actually.
Jesse, can you hang on just a minute? Angela, should we be seeing slides from or something from Jesse?
Yeah, Jesse, I think what Chuck said was not yet. We couldn't see your slide.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You did share.
Okay, here we go. Here we go.
Okay.
All right.
The large
interruption.
Perfect. No, thank you for letting me know. So I do want to start with that introduction of Melody Riley for our Associate CIO and Applications and Middleware role. This is a role that leads a large staff of just under 50 folks, and it is responsible for the major enterprise applications, software, and those integrations and databases on campus, as well as our collaboration tools, which have been critically important of late, as well as identity management, and then our business intelligence. And Melody has joined us here today, and I wanted to allow you all to have a moment to just meet her, as I know that she'll be sharing with you information in the future.
Great. Thanks so much, Jesse. It's wonderful to meet you all today. My 18 years experience for the state government actually culminated to my role as Chief Technology Officer role there. It was actually in that position that I met several of my higher education colleagues while working on the statewide broadband and Link Oregon initiative that probably many of you have heard about. And just prior to coming to the University of Oregon, I was with Oregon State University with a focus on constituent relationship management. That really cemented for me that higher education was the place for me. I'm very passionate about how we can leverage data and technology to enrich the human condition while supporting the missions of the public university, research university. So I've been so excited to be here. Even in this remote work setting, everybody has been so welcoming at the university. I'm actually living in Salem, but moving to Eugene. I'm really excited to be a Duck. And so thank you very much for this time to be introduced to you.
Thank you, Melody. So the remainder of my time, I'd like to share with you all where we are with Transform IT and going into the final phase of it, which is incredible. A brief update on research technology, both on and off campus, and then finally touch on cybersecurity. So if you recall this slide from a presentation that I did at the very early phase of Transform IT, and while it is a bit of an eye chart, the key takeaways here are that when we started this process and we did our assessment, anything that's not in gray, so yellow and green, were distributed functions that we needed to take a look at and determine whether or not those needed to be rationalized and pulled together. So over that time frame, we started with the user support services group. We took this set of 5 disparate services that were being delivered in a really fractured way across campus with about 60 FTE and have pulled that together into a single unit called user support services. We're about 80% migrated, and by the end of the calendar year, the rest of those folks will have come together under a really cohesive service for campus, which has already been just so incredibly important. You know, if anything demonstrates that we have to have a cohesive and coordinated IT presence, it certainly is COVID. And we've been incredibly fortunate to have these wheels in motion so that we could support the mission as we go forward. The next section here in the green arrows are pieces that ended up being addressed through some organizational changes. Namely, when the libraries moved its classroom and AV support, as well as learning management systems and equipment checkout over to us via an organizational change, and some purchasing, and along with our CAS IT, so College of Arts and Sciences, came during that process as well. So we did a very deliberate process of organizational change, and then also kept our principles around how we migrated services intact. Finally, these pieces with black arrows are those that we have additional projects that are already in flight. And so those projects are things like the replacement of our telephone system into a full suite of collaboration and communications tools that will encompass calendaring, telephone, file sharing, and instant messaging and video conferencing. There's many of these services that were fractured and that are now being brought in and coordinated under other projects. And finally, there are a couple of things that were deemed to be out of scope because they were either mostly already, like network management, run through our central information services, or things like websites, where this was really the content development piece of websites, which belongs in the units. They really should have full control and authorship over that content, and we left that out of scope. So finally, what that means here is that out of these 29 service categories that we started with in 2018 at the end of our campus engagement project, that we are down to only 3 that are left to address. And that's business applications, including software and mission-facing applications and digital signage. And so the process that we're going through to address those is the same as we've addressed all the others. We're taking cross-campus collaborative teams, understanding our user net needs, understanding the mission, and creating a service recommendation that is cross-functional that'll allow us to move forward. And those categories have more than 1,170 different software applications found. And those cost us about $9 million a year recurring, not including the cost of staffing. So this is a big category. It's going to take us about 3 years to address it. But we have some immediate low-hanging fruit that the team identified for us. One is to create a dynamic application catalog. We need to continue our current implementations in progress and retire those legacy tools that are associated with them, and create a campus custom development software service. Those are the things that we have broad agreement we can move forward on immediately. And then there are some things that we really have to do deeper dive into, and that's the right side of this. Things like databases and analytics. We have an awful lot of services that don't talk to each other. Chuck, you talked about at the beginning of this meeting, the need for better data coordination. And this is one impediment to that. And we're working through how do we get to a place where we can use data more intelligently. And this will be key. So what I would say about Transform IT is we're in the home stretch. The home stretch is going to be challenging. It'll probably take us 3 years to get through addressing this entire scope of software. But we've gone from 29 categories of service where things were disconnected and we didn't have a rational way of approaching things on campus to now just a small category with a lot of pieces in it to address. So I'm incredibly grateful for my colleagues and grateful for campus IT and their engagement and participation on this journey, because it is a really challenging process. You know, it's not an easy thing to fix. If it was, it would have been wouldn't have been so complicated. So I just want to express how grateful I am for campus's support and for all the IT staff that are engaged in this process. On the topic of research technologies, we have two basic categories that I wanted to share with you. One is the on-campus services and a brief update there, and the other is an update on our statewide collaboration. So we've talked a bit in the past about our supercomputer, Talipus, which is part of the Research Advanced Computing Services team. This summer, actually in July, at the beginning of the academic year, the Research Advanced Computing Services team moved into information services. This has given us such a tight-knit collaborative opportunity between this group and the rest of our research technology services that are currently being offered out of our enterprise services team in information services. And it's allowing us to really rethink how we're funding for end of life year in the supercomputing facility and making sure that this will be a service that can live on. We also have a research engagement hire pending out of that team that's going to allow us to give much deeper technical consulting support to our faculty and allow them to really focus on science. On the statewide side, I know I've talked to you all over the last several years about Link Oregon, which when it started was really a nascent concept of taking our old Nero network, which was 10 gig up and down the state from Portland to Salem, Corvallis, Eugene, and back again, with the rest of it at single gig lease circuits that were resulting in a lack of data transferability and collaboration for researchers and the state itself. And we are now at a place where we have high-speed fiber broadband. We have a 501c3 and an ORS 190 established. We have roughly 2,400 route miles of fiber that has been acquired across the state. And we're in the process of lighting those rings. Here during COVID, we were awarded $8.4 million in CARES Act funding to fast track the rural Oregon build out, to be able to really improve the speed at which we're working through this process with the state. It's gone incredibly well. I sit on the board as treasurer, as well as the other CIOs in the research universities in the state. And then of course we have state board representation for a total of 9 board members. Finally, I do want to touch on cybersecurity. This slide also should look somewhat familiar to you. The last time we talked about it, we talked about these targets in priority order after the first round of funding for cybersecurity. And one of the challenges that COVID has given us is certainly a financial one. So we have rethought how we can continue to move forward with cybersecurity, and how do we make progress even in the absence of new funding. So two-factor authentication, of course, I think everyone's familiar with that. We now have all staff currently active and logging into the system. The student employee transition is underway. So those students who are also employees are our first priority in the student population, and the remaining students will follow. We're beginning self-phishing internally. So that's the concept that we can use that to measure our effectiveness of our training, make sure that folks understand what a phishing email is and they can actually experience one. Hopefully they recognize it and report it as a phishing email rather than clicking on a link. But it gives us an ability to do follow-up training where needed and also measure the effectiveness of our education. Vulnerability management. We have restarted following a pause due to our COVID-19 response. This really allows us to find and fix the vulnerabilities in our systems before the adversary does. And it's a suite of tools that allows us to do that. We have funds reallocated for data loss prevention, which is an insecure data storage curtailment. And then finally, incident monitoring and response. This is a very cool project with partnership with Andre Leduc's shop. It's the joint operations of a cyber physical operations center. We did fund that project and renovate a space where the physical operations center and the cyber operations center can cohabitate. The future really of cyber is to understand not only what's happening in the cyber world, but also how that may be impacting what's going on physically. And we are staffing that with students and partnering with computer and information science to create experiential learning for those students that are engaging in that program. Lastly, we're actually working with the Office of Scholarship and Financial Aid to add 2 or 3 scholarships for UO students studying aspects of cyber. These scholarships are funded by donations from our industry partners. And we believe that we'll be able to continue to follow that forward for the next 2 to 3 students in perpetuity and forward years. So that's a lot of information. I know that we only had a brief time, but I wanted to touch on those things, and I'll just pause and find out if anyone has any particular questions. I'm not going to talk in depth, but there's an additional slide for your reading around what we've done in IT, in IT to respond to COVID-19 over the last 7 months.
Terrific. Are there questions for Jesse?
Yeah, Chuck, it's Marcia. Jesse, I'm just curious. I was reading the other day about some ransomware attacks that are hitting hospitals in Oregon and California and elsewhere. Where are we in terms of, protecting ourselves from potential attacks?
Certainly, ransomware is absolutely an enormous concern, and it is one of those things that I think is a primary worry in the cybersecurity space. Prior to COVID, we were actually actively working on awareness around this. We held a tabletop exercise with the incident management team including President Schill and Provost Phillips, vice presidents from across the campus, as well as staff. So we did a full-blown half-day tabletop on what would it look like if we had a ransomware attack, and how do we handle it and what do we do? And we were able to take a lot of learning through that and not only start to approach our business processes a little bit differently around what we learned, but we are also things like phishing, two-factor authentication. 98% of your risk comes from phishing attempts via email. And so if we can prevent those from happening through a two-pronged approach, one is two-factor. So even if someone gives up their credentials via a phishing attempt, if the criminal attempts to use that to log in to do something like plant malicious software in our system, they don't have the token or the code or the mobile device that's the second factor to allow them in. So that's the first piece. And then, of course, making folks aware of what a phishing email really looks like. There are other ways that ransomware happens through penetration attacks and other ways as well, which those aspects on that cyber slide are things that we're working on. But it's certainly a risk that everyone faces. I'm sure that you've seen that there have been very large publicly traded companies who have been victims of this, as well as some universities. And it's something that we're always working on defending against.
Other questions for Jesse? Jesse, to what extent do we use our networks and interact with the private sector?
So can you help me understand your question a little bit more, Chuck?
Well, so, I mean, suppose we had a research project a faculty member did with, pick any of the Intel or,
sure.
Taiwan Semiconductors. How successfully or fully are we able to connect through our network into private sector business networks?
Thank you. Extremely successfully. So we now have 100 gig connectivity on campus at the core, and we are very selective about where we deploy that because, of course, it's very expensive, and your average person at the desktop doesn't even need 10. It's really the large pieces of research data or musical performances or things like that that really require that exceptionally high speed. And we also have 100 gig connectivity off of our campus out to the 100 gig network. So we're now at a 10x speed across the state via Link Oregon than we used to be. And we are able to connect at high speed. We have a suite of tools that that research engagement hire will be really critical in helping our researchers use most seamlessly and effectively. And we're able to do it both in a secure fashion and also be able to connect off campus to wherever we need to go.
And are there any issues that you're nervous about as we interface more 5G wireless networks?
Not nervous. I'm really excited about the possibilities for research and the things that we don't even know yet are possible with 5G. As 5G becomes more and more prevalent, and we'll be able to open opportunities for our researchers to think about things like smart cities and things that we haven't even conceived of that low latency are going to be able to allow us to do. I would say the one thing that right now I'm more concerned about is that our workforce has suddenly expanded onto the home network. And so making sure that our staff is incredibly educated about good security practices is really important, because they're no longer just on campus on our own network. They're actually at home using whichever private internet service provider they have, which makes our network incredibly more complex.
Yeah. Any other questions for Jesse?
Oh, this is Alan. Maybe this is probably a question more maybe for Patrick, but I've always been concerned about our online systems, both in terms of structure of the network, but obviously most of it's maybe more coursework. But where are we? Are we catching up, or is this a question for another meeting?
So Patrick, I defer to you around kind of what depth we want to go into. we are absolutely in a place from an infrastructure perspective and a tools perspective to be able to deliver online pedagogy. I work really closely with Carol Gehring, our AVP for online education, and she is part of the Provost's office and is actively working on enabling our faculty to become more sophisticated around that process.
I could just quickly chime in. We'd be happy to dig in on this more. I think probably the conversation certainly 3 years ago would have been, what is our on-campus technology capacity to deliver such things? I think the shift to the cloud kind of support environment that most of these support agencies have, for instance, on Canvas, faculty are currently recording their courses, and then the videos are put to the cloud, and then they're automatically linked back to their coursework. So that takes some of the burden off us just to build technology, computational infrastructure to support online courses. So the way that we see it, it's really the front end side of it, which is doing the course design work. That's really the human capital is the more important investment than the technology at this phase, because we would just buy that as we need it. That being said, there's a couple of things, and I think we've reported this before. We've made huge investments, and Jesse's team was very proactive on this to upgrade the classroom environment so that we have more cameras and document cameras and those kinds of things, so that we can actually deliver these hybrid courses. Right now, we're underutilizing that capacity, quite frankly, that we invested in. So that's an interesting opportunity moving forward. And then the final thing is, although maybe this is solved with some of that, is if we're going to actually record courses, the next generation more, if that's something that faculty want to do and that we institutionally decide to do, there's maybe some opportunity to invest a little bit more in studio space so that we can have even higher end ways of delivering courses. But I think if your question was really like, do we have the infrastructure to deliver online courses? We do, and we are, and we have, and we've ramped that up tremendously over the last 6 months.
COVID's provided us a great opportunity to really capitalize on this moment and upgrade not only our facilities, as Patrick has said, but we have Zoom integrated with Canvas and Panopto for video, and we're in a much more robust place.
Thank you.
Cool. Any other questions for Jesse? Or all right, Jesse, thank you very much, and keep after it. It's going well. President Schill, do you have any other things we want to deal with that Angela will allow us to deal with?
I think Angela won't allow us to deal with much that isn't already agendized, if that's a verb, but I am good. I want to thank everyone for being part of this ad hoc meeting.
Okay, if there's no other issues we want to deal with, let's adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone. We're getting better at this video life. Thanks very much, Michael.
Thank
you. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Chuck.
Bye-bye.